Welcome to Carmen Madrid's podcast. Are you preparing for the DELE B2 or C1 exam? This podcast is made just for you. Carmen Madrid is an accredited examiner from the Instituto Cervantes and your new tutor for this exam. Each episode features a conversation between two speakers generated using advanced AI technology. These conversations are about a previous episode of a Spanish podcast on the DELE B2 and C1 exams. But that's not all. We offer a range of services to support your learning journey. One-on-one and group Spanish classes, books for DELE preparation to help you study effectively, exclusive access to the news club and reading club, plus our advanced grammar workshop to deepen your understanding of Spanish. You can find everything at deleexam.com. Join us in taking your Spanish to the next level. I'll leave you with my AI friends. Enjoy.
So, if you are preparing for the DELE C1 Spanish proficiency exam, you probably know that written section, the prueba escrita. It can feel like, well, a complete black box. You spend 2 hours writing this complex argument, you use your best subjunctive, you send it off, and then you read for months, never really knowing what the examiners were actually looking for.
And that uncertainty, that black box feeling, is exactly what we want to clear up today. We're basically offering a shortcut, a strategic guide that unpacks the official evaluation criteria, because understanding how your abilities are judged is, frankly, the most important step you can take to level up your prep. You just can't hit a target you can't see.
Absolutely. It's all about seeing that target clearly. And just for context, this is our English deep dive from 264, but it's built right on top of the groundwork from our original Spanish one, which was 140. So if you want to hear this in the original Spanish or even read the official info in English, you can find all of it at deleexam.com. Just look for episode 140 or the About DLE in English section. It's on Spotify, too.
And here's the initial shock factor. The main strategic takeaway right out of the gate. The C1 written exam is not primarily a grammar test. So many students focus, 80% of their time on complex grammar, but when you actually see the scorecard, you realize the assessment uses 4 analytical categories plus a general holistic evaluation.
Hang on. 4 analytical areas plus 1 holistic score. So that's 5 possible grades that determine whether you pass or fail.
Correct. And here's the kicker. Only one of those 5 is specifically about grammatical accuracy. So if you walk in thinking perfect grammar is your ticket to C1, you're missing 4/5 of the game.
Wow, that immediately throws a wrench in the typical prep strategy. So, okay, let's get into the specifics of this scorecard. What are these 5 areas?
We have 4 analytical categories where the examiner is giving specific detailed points, and then that 5th score, which is more of a big picture impression. The 4 analytical ones are, number 1, cohesion y coherencia. That's cohesion and coherence. Number 2, correction, which is correction or accuracy. Number 3, alcance, meaning scope or your lexical range. And number 4 is mediación y cumplimiento de la tarea 1, mediation and task fulfillment.
And the 5th one, the final call.
That is the holistica, the general overall impression score. It's about how the entire text works as a whole. It's also really important to mention a key change here. There used to be a category called adecuación al género discursivo, or genre appropriateness. That's gone.
Oh, gone. Replaced with what?
It's now been folded into that mediación y cumplimiento de la tarea category.
That's a huge tell. It shows the exam is shifting from just writing in a style to actively communicating and adapting information for a purpose. But sticking with the numbers for a second. 5 grades, and only 1 is about correction. You could be a grammar whiz and still fail if your text is confusing or doesn't actually answer the question.
Exactly. So let's start with what I think is the strategic backbone of your writing, cohesion y coherencia. They are 2 distinct concepts, and to get a C1, you have to master both.
Okay, so if we're thinking of a text as a building, what part is cohesion?
Cohesion is the internal architecture. It's how the individual parts of the text, the bricks and beams, are linked together. We're talking about micro-level things, perfect concordance, masculine, feminine, singular, plural, all of that. And critically, it's your command of discourse markers, or nexos, those connectors. At the C1 level, they expect that scaffolding to be almost invisible.
Invisible glue. So it's not just about knowing 3 basic connectors, but about using sophisticated, varied language to link everything together seamlessly.
Precisely. It also covers the logical flow of verb tenses. Can you maintain a consistent timeline over 500 words? It even checks for, the correct repetition of prepositions that depend on the same verb. The goal is just flow.
Okay, so if cohesion is the structural network, Coherence must be the building's overall purpose, right?
That's a perfect analogy. Coherence is the global sense. Does the text have a single, clear purpose? Are your ideas organized and actually relevant to the topic? It's about making sure the text has a unit of sense. The C1 reader needs to follow your argument's path without any effort.
And that path has to actually go somewhere. It can't just circle around.
It has to progress, yes. New information has to logically connect to what came before. Examiners are on the lookout for sudden jumps that just confuse the reader. If you have good coherence, your ideas are easy to follow because you've laid out a clear roadmap.
So what are the traps? What specifically destroys coherence in a C1 essay?
Well, the sources point to a few common failures. The first is just not having a common subject or a single purpose. The essay starts arguing one thing and then veers off into something else. Second is a poor selection of information. Either too much, so you overwhelm the reader, or not enough, so you leave out critical context.
So basically rambling on one hand or being too cryptic on the other.
Exactly. And probably the worst one is including irrelevant information, badly ordered ideas, or, and this is a big one, contradicting yourself. The examiner should never have to stop and think, wait, didn't they just argue the opposite 2 paragraphs ago?
Let's use that climate change example to make it concrete. How would a C1 text show great cohesion and coherence?
The mastery is in the structural language. A good example would use high-level connectors to link entire arguments like, quote, in Primer Luger, it's essential to mention the global impact. Sin embargo, not all countries are equally equipped, and por consiguiente, developing nations are the most vulnerable. Esto se debe a lack of infrastructure.
I can hear it. The cause and effect, the contrast, it's all being explicitly signaled. The argument has layers.
And contrast that with a text that fails on coherence.
Right.
Climate change is a global problem. Many countries are affected. Resources are important. The environment is changing.
It's just a list of facts.
Exactly. There's no argument, no connection between the sentences, no progression. The examiner has no idea what the writer's actual point is.
That makes the difference so clear. Okay, let's pivot from the structure to the language itself. This battle between correction and alcance. Quality versus quantity. Let's hit correction first. The 1 grade out of 5 for pure accuracy.
Right. Correction measures correct language use, so grammar, spelling, vocabulary usage. Obviously, fewer errors means a better score, but we have to talk about the big misconception students have here about flawlessness.
Yeah, please clarify this. Does C1 demand absolute perfection?
So if you're aiming for band 3, which is actually superior to the C1 passing level, the criteria say you may produce some error in infrequent uses of the language.
Okay, so a rare slip on some really obscure grammar point might be okay. That sounds a little forgiving.
Wait, hold on. Here's the crucial, completely unforgiving rule that so many candidates miss, even when they're aiming for the top band. The writing presents no spelling errors.
No spelling errors at all.
At all.
So you're saying even if a student writes a perfect series of complex clauses, one forgotten accent mark on solo, or a comma splice, that could seriously damage their correction score?
Yeah.
That feels brutal.
It is brutal, and it's strategic. The examiners know C1 candidates can handle complex grammar. What they're testing for here is absolute mastery of the fundamentals. Control over spelling, punctuation, accents. It's mandatory because those things affect readability for a native speaker. You have to proofread. And then you have to proofread again, just for those small things.
Message received loud and clear. Complexity is great, but fundamental accuracy is non-negotiable.
So what about alcance? Is that just about having a huge vocabulary? That's the common B2 mistake. At C1, alcance does measure your lexical repertoire, your vocabulary, but the real key is how well you develop and argue your ideas with precision. It's about the quality of your expression, not just the number of words you know.
So it's not about using big words, it's about using the right word to get a subtle meaning across.
Precisely. For Band 2, which is the exact C1 level, they want an ample lexical repertoire, yes, but also a good command of colloquial expressions and the ability to express opinions and statements with precision. And specifically, they mention expressing degrees of certainty, uncertainty, belief, doubt, or probability.
Ah, okay. So instead of just saying, I think this is true, a C1 writer needs to use phrases like, it is plausible that, or one might infer that. You're fine-tuning the degree of truth.
Exactly. And on top of that, C1 scope requires techniques like nominalization, turning a verb phrase into a concise noun. For example, instead of saying, el hecho de que la gente tome decisiones informadas, a C1 text would use the more formal and precise, la toma de decisiones informadas.
It just sounds more academic, more controlled.
It shows linguistic flexibility and control over your register.
Okay, let's use that social inequality example. Contrast poor scope with good scope.
Poor scope is shallow. Something like, social inequality is a problem that must be solved. We have to improve education for children. Simple verbs, simple ideas.
And how does good scope elevate that to the C1 level?
Good scope shows a multifaceted argument with a much broader, more academic vocabulary, like, for the eradication of social inequality, the implementation of a robust educational system is insufficient. It is imperative to guarantee accessibility to employment and quality health services for all citizens, independently of their procedencia or economic situation.
You can hear the difference. The nominalizations, the specialized vocabulary. The argument itself is more complex because the language allows it to be.
The complexity of your argument is tied directly to the complexity of your vocabulary.
Right. So let's move on to the new criteria. Mediación y cumplimiento de la tarea. This feels like where everything comes together.
It really does. This category defines the C1 level because it's all about adaptability. Mediation is your capacity to transmit and, importantly, adapt information clearly and effectively for someone else. And task fulfillment is just what it sounds like. Did you do everything the instructions ask for completely and adequately?
So you have to be a good reader of the prompt, a good synthesizer of the material, and a good adapter of the language all at once. What does Task 1 usually ask for in terms of mediation?
Task 1 usually has you explaining or summarizing a source text or maybe some data for a new audience. You have to adapt the content and the tone to whatever their needs are. This means you have to first understand the source text, get the main arguments, and then transfer and condense that into a new text, all while using the right register.
So it's less of a summary and more of a reformulation.
Exactly. It has to be a true condensation and reformulation. You have to pull out the most important ideas, both the main ones and the secondary ones, and then present them in a new cohesive text that fits the new context.
And Task 2 is usually the longer piece, the argumentative essay or the report. What's the key focus there?
For Task 2, the focus is twofold. First, the depth of your argument, and second, sticking perfectly to the required genre and audience. If they ask for a formal report for a city council, you have to use that formal structure and tone. If it's an opinion article, you need a more persuasive, personal, yet still sophisticated voice.
Let's see an example of strong task fulfillment for Task 2. Say, an argumentative text on environmental education.
A strong response wouldn't just say environmental education is good. It would defend a clear thesis and adapt its language to persuade. Something like, environmental education must be a fundamental pillar in the educational system. Ya que, there's your cohesion. It allows new generations to make proactive and informed decisions. There's your scope to mitigate environmental damage, fomentando así cohesion again, a consciousness of sustainability from childhood.
It has a clear purpose and uses the language to achieve it. What about that report example? Explaining data on factory technology. The tone has to be totally different.
Absolutely. A report needs a neutral, analytical tone. It shows you can mediate complex data effectively. A good text would say something like, the study demonstrates how automation has optimized factory efficiency, resulting in a substantial reduction in production time and costs. No obstante, a connector showing caution, the research also indicates that this transformation combat the challenge of job loss due to the substitution of labor.
It manages to communicate both sides of the data without taking a personal stand. Very clear.
That's the goal.
Okay, that covers the 4 analytical categories.
Okay.
So finally, let's talk about Holistica, the overall impression score. What's the examiner looking at here?
Holistica is the examiner just stepping back and looking at the text as a single unit. It's a synthesis. It checks if the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It's about overall effectiveness. I mean, you can have good individual scores, but if the text still feels clunky or is hard to read, the holistic score is going to suffer.
So if my cohesion is good overall, but my errors are all clumped into one confusing paragraph, the holistic score is where the examiner can account for that disruption to the flow.
Exactly. The key to a high holistic score is that general impression. Is the text well organized? Are there no serious errors getting in the way of communication? Are the ideas developed well? And is the communicative task, the mediation, actually successful?
And what's the ultimate test for a good holistic score?
The standard is pretty simple. Would this text be readable and comprehensible for a normal Spanish speaker? You know, someone who isn't sitting there with a grading sheet, but is just reading it for its message. If the text flows naturally, if the arguments are clear, and if the purpose is achieved effortlessly, you'll get a high holistic score.
This deep dive has really, I think, fundamentally shifted the strategy for the C1 written exam. It proves that the test goes way beyond just accuracy, which, as you said, is mandatory, and focuses so much more on communicative competence. You have to master all 5 areas, especially things like cohesion, coherence, and scope. Because if you can't build a nuanced, well-connected argument, the best grammar in the world isn't going to save you.
Right. And that need to move beyond just chasing down errors and instead focus on complex argumentation, on adapting your language for an audience. That's the biggest C1 hurdle. So the reflective question we want to leave you with is this. Are your prep strategies right now focused mostly on eliminating grammar mistakes? Or are they truly aimed at showing you can mediate complex information and build precise, persuasive arguments? Because that distinction, that's the difference between B2 and C1 success.
That's a fantastic insight to end on. And for those of you who now feel ready to take this knowledge and put it into practice, whether for the DELE or just to get your Spanish to that next level, we can definitely help with that.
If you want to prepare for the DELE or just study Spanish with courses or individual classes that target these specific criteria, you should get in touch by emailing carmenmadgersonline@gmail.com. We're looking at putting together some dedicated group courses for DELE, B2, and C1 strategies, so reach out and you can explore the options to start applying all this today.
Thanks for with us. We'll see you next time.